Welcome back to One Piece Explained. Chapter 1094 is probably one of the craziest chapters that we've had all year, which is quite something considering how wild all of the chapters in the Egghead arc have been. Now there's a lot to talk about in this chapter, so we're going to get right into it, and there's a special something that I want to go into about Brook in relation to Saturn later on in this video. But first, if you're not subscribed, I really would appreciate it if you do. It helps the channel grow, and you'll be able to get these weekly manga analyses as soon as they drop. So with that said, let's get into chapter 1094. Five Elders, Godhead of Science and Defense, J. Garcia, Saturn. This chapter features a color spread, and one of the coolest ones at that. On display are all of the members of the Shimotsuki family, who are related by blood. And we've seen every character on this color spread in the main story, except for one, and we'll touch on that in just a second. Of course, front and center we have Roronoa Zoro. To the right are the Shimotsuki family members who ended up in the East Blue, with Koshiro, his father Kozaburo, and his daughter Kuina. To the left of Zoro is of course Ryuma, one of the oldest known members of the clan whose corpse we first met during the Thriller Bark arc, and below him is the former daimyo of Hakumai, Yasue, as well as the former daimyo of Ringo, Ushimaru, and his companion Onimaru, who isn't a blood-related member of course, but he serves the clan nonetheless. And remember that Toko isn't actually Yasue's adopted daughter as we learned in Volume 99's SPS, and thus she would not be featured here. Now, the big question is, of course, who is the man in the upper left corner with the red hair? I've seen a lot of people think this to be Ryuma when he was alive. However, I don't think this is the case, as Ryuma has never been depicted with red hair before. In his original appearance in Oda's Monsters, Ryuma was depicted with dark or black hair, and even in the anime, he's shown with hair that is at most tinted in blue. But then who could this be? Well, in Volume 105's SPS, we got a better understanding of the Shimotsuki family's lineage, and with that, we learned of Zoro's parents as well as his grandparents. 55 years ago, a group of 25 people left Wano, and 10 of them ended up settling in a village in the East Blue, which would end up becoming known as Shimotsuki Village. Among that group was Kozaburo, as well as Furiko, who is the older sister of Ushimaru. Furiko married a swordsman named Roronoa Pinzoro, and the two would have a child, Roronoa Arashi, who himself would go on to have a child, Roronoa Zoro. So considering that this color spread features only members of the Shimotsuki family who are related by blood, aside from the pet Onimaru of course, then this man with the red hair may be Roronoa Arashi, Zoro's father and Shimotsuki Furiko's son. His silhouette as drawn by Oda with the spiked up hair somewhat resembles the hair that we see here. Of course, this is my best educated guess, though I really do doubt that this is Ryuma and his hair colors being retconned. But hey, Kuina is also depicted with black hair like Koshiro here, despite her hair being portrayed as dark blue in the past, so I guess we can't ever be too sure. Now onto the chapter itself. Vegapunk and Atlas, along with Frankie and Sanji, are driving straight down the road, but are somehow able to maintain contact with the cloud. Vegapunk explains that this is just the nature of the island clouds, which allows the clouds to stick to one another without falling off. Now this makes me wonder if he's talking about a property of pyrobloin, which is found in sea stone and island clouds, as it was first mentioned back during the Skypiea arc, and then brought up again earlier in this arc. Perhaps this property of sticking to itself is actually what gives sea stone its dense, hard nature. On their way down, Sanji spots Bonnie and attributes this to his Lady Radar. We've actually seen his so-called Lady Radar in action throughout the years, particularly in the New World, as we saw him sense Tashigi in danger on Punk Hazard, as well as Viola's presence in Dressrosa, and a few times throughout Wano, such as with him locking in on Hiyori in danger, or thinking Sarahebi was in danger before realizing it was a trap set by Black Maria. We also got a glimpse of it at the start of this arc when he was able to sense Bonnie in the ocean, and he likely used it again to find Nami when she screamed against S-Shark. Sanji is very proficient at observation hockey, of course, as we learned in Volume 71's SPS that it was his specialty in relation to Zoro and Luffy, so it's fun to get a somewhat formalized name for this gag. Down below, Bonnie is deep in battle with the various Marines on the island. We see her debut a new technique, near-death experience, which seems to involve her firing a bullet that makes the targets feel as if they are actually dead, frightening them to the point of knocking them out or immobilizing them. Now, it's unclear if she's actually firing a bullet or just using the pistol as a medium to direct this technique, but we have seen her use various objects to channel her abilities, such as with her H-skewer technique. Among the Marines that she's fighting are some of the Vice Admirals that we first saw in Chapter 1089. The Vice Admiral with the cleft chin and sunglasses wields a polearm with a shell atop that he uses for his Otterhammer technique. Note that he also seems to have a Zoan Devil Fruit that allows him to turn him into a sea otter. This would explain the shell weapon, as this is a nod to the idea of sea otters often being associated with clams. This trope of sea otters using clams as weapons can be found in various media as well, such as with the Pokemon Oshawott, and we've also had this in One Piece before with Mr. 13 from Baroque Works. We're also introduced to another Vice Admiral from Chapter 1089, Vice Admiral Bluegrass. She has the Ride fruit, which lets her ride anything as a driver, which seems to allow her to override and control one of the Pacifista. Now this reminds me a bit of the Jacket fruit, which lets the user control anybody who puts them on, but this fruit feels a lot better. Her name Bluegrass may also be a nod to the specific genre of music which could play into her design, featuring this large pair of headphones. A little bit later, we get another glimpse of the Vice Admirals where we see the long-haired Vice Admiral with the sharp teeth standing beside Vice Admiral Dahl. With his relative size, I think it's a little more clear that this Vice Admiral is likely a fisherman as opposed to some sort of ancient giant like Oars, and if so, this would make him the first fishman in the series to be part of the Marines. Somewhat of note, he seems to use some sort of staff or cane, perhaps a baton. Meanwhile, Luffy and Kizaru are still going at it, and it's made clear that Kizaru is just trying to carry out his mission, while Luffy is trying his best to stop Kizaru from completing it. Across this chapter, we see both of them panting, implying that they've been tiring each other out from all of this, and as such, Kizaru runs away towards Vegapunk, knocking Vegatank 8 off the road. Now Luffy catches up and debuts a new technique, the Gum Gum Star Gun. A huge punch to the head with his one arm inflated and infused with armament and or Conqueror's Haki. Now the impact is so devastating that it's depicted with these classic cartoon stars coming out of Kizaru, and it's very reminiscent of the punch Luffy landed on Kaido back on Onigashima. Now these stars are not necessarily new, as we've seen Gear 5th depicted with stars before when damaging an enemy, such as how Kaido was dazed, or even how Luffy was depicted when he was hurt. This is also strong enough to send Kizaru flying into a building, causing it to collapse. However, it also takes a lot out of Luffy, taking him out of Gear 5th. Now, one of the things that's really been interesting to me is how Luffy looks when he's reverting to his regular self. Back on Onigashima, we see him wheeze and pant with his tongue out, and earlier in this arc, after his bout with Lucci, he was in a very similar state, although this time his tongue was sticking out even more. Back then, this reminded me a lot of Vegapunk's appearance, but I wasn't sure if there was much more to it. But here, as Luffy begins to lose steam, his appearance looks a lot like Kizaru's with the pursed lips. We see him later on the ground with the tongue out once again, but I can't help but wonder if there's something going on here. Perhaps this is just a stylistic choice by Oda at the very least, with this idea of Luffy mimicking people around him as he reverts to his base form. Just something to think about. But now, let's talk about the craziest part of the chapter. J. Garcia, Saturn. While all of these fights are going on, several people notice a strange presence nearby. From Zoro, Luffy, Kizaru, and Lucci to Jinbei and even the Vice Admirals on the island. Perhaps even Sanji within the Vegatank 8, though Usopp, Nami, and Chopper, the quote-unquote weak trio, are seen rushing what looks to be an injured Stussy across the lab. But I do love that they're all flying through the air with their Dom boots. Anyways, an order is given to the lower rank Marines not to make contact with Saturn when he arrives on the island, as we see a huge summoning circle appear on the ground, with smoke, fire, and black lightning striking out of it. It's unclear if this is just a stylistic choice or if this is some manifestation of Haki, but from it rises a shadowy figure, at first resembling the monsters that we saw in Sabo's flashback to the Reverie. We get the debut of J. Garcia's Saturn, supposedly in his Devil Fruit mode, a huge hulking behemoth of a monster. There's a lot to talk about here, so we'll just get right into it, I guess. Saturn seems to resemble an Ushi-Oni, or Gyuki, an ox demon yokai whose most prominent feature is the head of an ox, and often is depicted with the body of a spider. Now this alone opens up a whole can of worms with regard to what the 5 elders actually are. We don't get a specific mention of any devil fruit here, causing some to speculate that this may actually be Saturn's true form or that the elders are demons themselves. But Saturn does have the Hagoromo-like black clouds around him, suggesting to me that this is an awakened Zoan, much like how Lucci and Kaku were. In Japanese folklore, the Ushi-Oni or Gyuki is able to consume the souls of others by simply locking them within their gaze, which is likely what this sequence between Saturn and the poor marine soldier is a nod to. The way his eyes light up here remind me a bit of how Big Mom's powers are able to extract souls out of people or homies. Similarly, I wonder if there's some potential interaction here with Brook, as we saw him overpower Big Mom's regular homies as the Soul King, and we'll talk more about Brook and Saturn in just a bit. If it wasn't evident yet, this is likely a mythical Zoan fruit, perhaps a mythical version of the ox fruit. So far, we've had two different base models, with Dalton's bison fruit and Kaku's giraffe fruit, although maybe it's a mythical version of the spider fruit, as we've only seen one instance of this fruit, and it was the ancient spider fruit eaten by Black Maria. However, there's definitely a chance that this could just be something else entirely, perhaps a yokai fruit or a demon fruit, with the model being Ushioni or Gyuki itself, maybe even a literal devil fruit. The possibilities are nearly endless here, so we'll just have to wait to see where Oda goes with this, but it does bring to question what the rest of the elders are able to transform into. Perhaps other various yokai-inspired beings as well, and I can speculate on this in a further video, but I'd love to hear what you guys have been cooking up in the comments. I do want to note though that this is likely his hybrid form, and it's possible that what we saw with Saba was actually his true beast form, if it wasn't just an intentionally vague depiction of the powers to begin with. The face of the bull that seems to be much larger there doesn't resemble Saturn's head here as much, but I also love that Saturn's beard and hair just kind of merge together to form this huge mane like he's an ox or a bison. It's great. Now, another really interesting aspect is the presence of this magic summoning circle that Saturn uses to arrive on the island. At first, this may seem a little off-brand for a series like One Piece, and I don't necessarily disagree. However, it is important to note that this kind of imagery has been depicted in the series before, most notably in Hungaria, the impoverished nation on Lazybones Island, where Brook was sent to by Kuma. Of course, the circle is not one-to-one, with the one used by the Hungarians being an octagram. However, the anime provides a better picture of the circle before Brook's arrival, and you can definitely see the pentagram in the middle. Before I get crazy, I should note that pentagrams and summoning circles have been used as occult imagery for decades, especially within this genre, so these could definitely be two separate, unrelated instances. Furthermore, the circle used by Saturn to arrive here could simply be a stylistic effect or a byproduct of hockey that we aren't yet privy to. So with these few disclaimers understood and out of the way, allow us to cook for just a little bit. In the source material, when the Hungarians are performing their ritual, they use a very specific word. Now in the Viz English translation, this is translated as the demon, but when you take a look at the original Japanese text, they use two kanji. The first being the character for evil, and the second often being used for devil or magic in some contexts. But the hiragana beside it reads akuma, which means devil. So this kanji is supposed to be read as devil as well. But apparently, this pair of kanji can be used to refer to Satan. In fact, in the anime, when we get the scene with this ritual extended, they are actually praying to Satan and calling for him by name. Now, why is this interesting? Well, here is Satan in hiragana, and here is Saturn's name written in hiragana. You'll notice it's the same exact characters, only with the long vowel mark placed after the hiragana for ta to represent Saturn's name. Now, back when 1085 came out, I had wondered if this was purely coincidence, as Saturn's form seemed to resemble a devil with these horns. Of course, his fruit does not seem to turn him into a devil, but rather an ox demon, an Ushioni. But the use of a summoning circle here is quite interesting, especially taken in context with the Hungarians who were also trying to summon Satan, or Saturn. Could these people actually worship one of the five elders, or whatever that elder actually represents or stands for with his devil fruit abilities? I guess I should also point out that the Hungarians also featured a cow skull or cow totem on their wall, which is another classic trope or piece of the occult, but it is also pretty interesting with the context of Saturn being an Ushioni. Now let's take a step back. Why was Brook sent to Hungaria? Kuma sent the Straw Hats to various places around the world where they would meet someone or encounter something that would bolster their abilities. Luffy met the Kuja and learned of hockey, Zoro trained under a Mihawk, Nami studied weather science in Wadaria, Usopp learned about pop greens from Heracleson, Sanji trained under Ivankov at the Kamabaka Queendom, Chopper studied medicine at the Torino Kingdom, Robin encountered the Revolutionary Army, who we recently learned had formed because of the O'Hara incident. Frankie came across Vegapunk's old lab in his hometown, but Brook got kidnapped by the Long Arm tribe and by the way of pure chance was turned into a rock star with the Long Arms as his manager. I mean, Brook did help save the Hungarians from the Long Arm tribe initially. Perhaps that was part of Kuma's intent with Brook, but he couldn't have known that the Long Arms would escape and take Brook back to their island. And not only that, they didn't really bolster Brook's abilities in any way other than sharpening his blade, the Soul Solid. And all of Brook's advancements with his Devil Fruit were by way of his own performances and not necessarily with the help of the Long Arm tribe. It just seems to me like he was sent to the Hungarians on Lazybones Island for a reason that never fully came to be. Because if he was meant to learn from the Long Arms, why not just send him to the Long Arm Kingdom in the first place? Perhaps he was supposed to learn about their worship of Saturn or Satan and develop his skills there. This gets a little more involved when you consider that it seemed to be Saturn who was adamant on erasing Kuma's memories, as we can understand from the exchange at the end of the chapter when Bonnie goes to attack Saturn. If the Hungarians actually do worship Saturn, then sending Brook to learn about the occult and Satanism may make sense. Of course, this is starting to tread on pure nonsense and works more so from the writer's perspective, as Kuma would not be privy to Saturn being this sort of demonic yokai. But hey, who knows? Maybe we'll see in Kuma's memories that he did in fact encounter Saturn's true abilities and wanted to be able to set one of the Straw Hats up to be able to fight back. After all, Brook is the Soul King, and Saturn does seem to use soul-related powers known to the Ushi Oni, as discussed earlier. I know there's going to be a ton of speculation on whether Sanji or Frankie can hold up against Saturn, but maybe this is Brook's time to shine. After all, he has barely said or done anything at all in this entire arc, and if you think I'm exaggerating, go back and check. He has a couple of lines every now and then, but almost every time he's about to fight or do something notable, he gets sidelined, such as when Zoro tells him to go back to the ship when fighting Kaku, or how Sanji interrupts his technique against S-Shark. I would love it if this is what Oda has been saving Brook for in this arc. I also want to mention that while the summoning circle definitely nods to Western ideas of the occult, the pentagram formation is not explicitly tied to Satanism. There is something known as Onyodo in Japanese, which can be read in Chinese as Yin Yang Do, which is literally translating to the way of yin and yang. And a big part of this practice is Wuxing, or the 5 classical Chinese elements, often referred to now as the 5 phases or 5 agents, being wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. The relationships and interactions between these 5 elements forms a pentagram, or a star. Now, during the Heian period in Japan, there was a practitioner of Onyodo known as Abe no Seimei, who became a very popular and important figure in history. And to my understanding, the use of pentagrams in many Japanese works actually originated from his seal or emblem, which represents Wuxing, the 5 classical Chinese elements. Now, why is Wuxing important? Well, in Japanese, the other planets closest to the sun were actually named after Wuxing. Mercury is Suisei, the water star. Venus is Kinsei, the metal star. Mars is Kasei, the fire star. Jupiter is Mokusei, the wood star. And Saturn is Dosei, the earth star. So the pentagram imagery clearly plays into this aspect of the 5 elder stars, or the Gorosei, as well. There's a lot of potential symbolism going on with the elders, as they seem to be influenced by various mythologies and sources, so it'll be interesting to get more and more information about them as the story progresses. And that's about it for the big things that I wanted to touch on in this chapter. I really want to know what you all think about Saturn. I talked about a bunch of possibilities and inspirations for his design, but I'm also curious how you feel about this idea of Brook and his abilities coming into play here. Now, if you enjoyed my thoughts and analysis, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like on the video or even subscribed. I do breakdowns like this every week for the manga, as well as deeper analysis videos. And I don't know if I actually mentioned this in a video yet, but you can also find me now on TikTok at One Piece Explained. So if that's up your alley, check me out there. As always, thank you so much for watching, stay safe, and I hope to see you in the next one.